Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the KongQue wash processed China from Sognefjord. And there's the container right there. And Sognefjord, based out of Sogndal, Norway, and hopefully I pronounced either of those two names somewhat correct, as it wouldn't be a KaffeBox Advent Calendar series if I didn't struggle to pronounce some of these Scandinavian names. But this is part 17 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and the first ever appearance for this coffee roaster on this channel, as they're yet another one of these roasters I had zero familiarity with going into this Advent calendar. And they opted for a very bold decision in going with a Chinese coffee, as that's not overly common for a lot of coffee roasters. In fact, it's only the second Chinese coffee we have ever reviewed on this channel, so this will make for a very interesting first impression. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and I couldn't find a brew guide for them, so we opted for our standard recipe in this Advent calendar, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in terms of roast profile, this one actually came out a little bit more light than I think I was expecting. It actually kind of falls in the middle of the spectrum in coffees that we have reviewed in this Advent calendar so far. So we've definitely had some coffees a little bit more developed than this one, and we've definitely had some coffees significantly lighter than this one. This one I would say falls on the slightly more developed side, still relatively light for what you might expect. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and I didn't really know what to expect with this coffee, being completely honest. As it is the second Chinese coffee I've ever had, the first impression I had of one was that it started out somewhat passable, and then it just really tapered off into something that I wasn't a fan of whatsoever. This one came out pretty moderate at the start, as there wasn't too much to really differentiate within this cup, as it just really came out as a milk chocolate forward cup of coffee with a complementary caramel aspect to it. And it just kind of reminded me of what you'd expect from a more, I would say, traditional Central American coffee in general. Nothing too overly distinct. There was a brightness that was also present in the cup as well, and I think that's kind of attributed to the way it was roasted. But for the most part, it just kind of complemented the moderate chocolate aspect within this cup. The fruit component I was able to pick out a little bit more of was this slightly citric aspect, as I did pick up a little bit of this orange component to it. And in addition to that, I really had to think on some other additional fruits, but that's kind of the only thing I really felt was notable in this cup. In addition to that, the sweeter chocolate and caramel attributes transitioned more into this kind of nutty component with a slight herbality. As the cup did cool down, it felt a lot more nutty to me, as the initial cup was a little bit of this kind of sweet chocolate caramel-like cup, and then after that it felt a little bit more peanutty, but even then, still an interesting kind of sweet peanut aspect to the cup. Here through the Chemex, it's been very similar. I don't think that there's too much different from either of these two brew methods. The coffee's been pretty consistent with whichever brew method I opted for. So just for the most part, pretty moderate cup of coffee in general. So I'm not necessarily going to say that's a bad thing yet. So we will go ahead though and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And one level 4, a bunch of level 3s. So we will of course start with the level 4, which is the cleanliness level 4. I mean, that's a good start. As long as you get the coffee, especially washed coffee, to that level 4 mark, then we're at the very least off to a good start. I don't have any complaints in terms of the clarity of this coffee. It just felt that maybe since the coffee was a little bit more moderate and tame in general, that the clarity was always going to be on the higher side of things. Not a whole lot of very strong flavor profiles within this coffee to begin with. So that being at that level 4 mark definitely feels very fitting for this coffee. Body, level 3. Yeah, again, nothing really too much to discuss in terms of the body in this coffee, because it had a very kind of medium-bodied coffee in general. Maybe on the slightly lower side of the level 3, but again, nothing too notable or noteworthy within the body itself. Finish, level 3. And that's a little different because well, I would say the majority of the coffees we drink end up on that level 4 or higher mark. But this one right here, given that it was a little bit more tame and moderate in general, did have a somewhat quick finish. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a super quick finish. That's why it's still at that level 3 mark, but even then, nothing too long-lasting or distinct in that sense either. Sweetness, level 3. I'm not going to lie, I'm actually a little surprised at how sweet this coffee was. This one is maybe on the higher side of level 3, but at the very least it warrants that level 3, which we have had some coffees reach that level 2 mark, so I think that that's a nice compliment to this coffee. I think that they were able to get some great sweetness from this cup. Acidity, level 3. And looking back on it, that level 3, it might actually be on the lower side of the level 3. In terms of the Chemex, and once the cup does cool down, there's significantly less brightness in the cup. So level 3 works for maybe the initial stages of the coffee, but then it does definitely kind of cool down into even some lower levels of acidity within the cup. Citrus fruit, level 3, and that's kind of what I mentioned. The only sort of fruit aspects I was able to pick out in somewhat notable prominence was the citric aspects to the coffee, a slight kind of orange tang to the cup. So that's why that's as high as it is, but truth be told, it would definitely be on the lower side of that level 3, as it was in nowhere near as pronounced of manner as the next two things we're going to discuss. First of which being the chocolate, most consistent, dominant theme throughout the time drinking this coffee. That one felt prominent right from the start and until the very end, and I actually quite like the way that this chocolate tastes. Definitely more of a milk chocolate person than a dark chocolate person, so that right there is maybe one of my favorite attributes of this cup. Right there with the caramel aspect, which definitely felt also pretty notable, also pretty sweet. And I think the combination of those two things, maybe being on the slightly more sweet side, is what contributed to this coffee being a little bit more sweet than initially expected. A bunch of level 2s, but I don't think any of them are actually worth noting. Even the kind of nuttiness that was within this cup, it wasn't an overly salty nuttiness. It was actually, interestingly, a more sweet nutty component to the cup. So I don't even think that that's worth discussing in the tasting wheel. This is pretty in line with what I was experiencing from this coffee from both brew methods. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it was a little better than I was expecting. And I'll be completely honest that I have very low standards for Chinese coffees as of this moment, mostly because the only other one I've ever tried I really didn't like that much. So with that being said, this one exceeded my expectations, and I guess it kind of sets up nicely for the second coffee that they will include in this advent calendar, because if you exceed my expectations with your first coffee, then there's definitely a lot of promise and potential for the next one. But this coffee was just pretty tame in general, so I had a little bit of difficult time maybe trying to figure out what I wanted to say about this coffee. It's just kind of reminding me of a lot of a more traditional Central American coffee that's slightly lighter roasted in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you have been curious about Chinese coffees, I think this is a good one, because this one to me was significantly better than the only other one we've reviewed on this channel. And truth be told, I feel like if you put this in a blind taste test, it's entirely possible I would be able to pick this one out from the other ones. I think maybe if I brewed this side by side with maybe a nicer Central American coffee or South American coffee, probably a Brazilian coffee I think would be a great comparison, and see if I could really pick out a huge difference. But just drinking it on its own, it was actually quite nice. So I feel like if you've been curious about Chinese coffees and you typically like the more traditional Brazilian, Central American coffees, then this one might be a nice fit for you. I think for the most part though, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the KongQue wash processed China from Sognefjord. Thank you for watching.